All right, thank you guys for joining us today. I'm just going to give us a few more minutes so we can make sure we start around 1 o'clock, leave some time for people to join the broadcast. But welcome to NP2B's What's Up webinar series. All right, and if you're joining us, like I said, just give us a few more minutes and we're just going to wait for everyone to hop on board here. Welcome to NP2B's What's Up webinar series. All right, and just a few more minutes. I just want to make sure anyone straggling behind can hop in on time. And we will get started with our What's Up with Pediatric Vaccinations webinar today. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar series. Today's discussion is going to be What's Up with Pediatric Vaccinations, Discussions with Resistant Parents. My name is Nasreen, and I want to personally thank you for joining our webinar service. I'm one of the co-founders of NP2B, and we are very excited about the services we have to offer you guys as you make your transition from NP student to NP new graduate. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. The first thing we are going to talk about is rates of vaccination. Now I'm going to go through some of these slides and add personal anecdotes and such. If you have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and to your right, there is a chat box. You can type in whatever you would like, and they are privately displayed to me. They will not be made public, so do not be afraid to ask whatever you would like, and we will address them as we get the questions in. And also, if you would be so kind to mute and shut off your cameras if you have them, so that way we don't hear everybody's background noise and things of that nature. That way everyone can hear clearly and get a chance to really grasp what we're talking about and get their questions answered. I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so rates of vaccination. We wanted to show you guys this slide here because this is for ages 19 to 35 months. Rates of vaccination in the US, according to a 2013 CDC statistical report, really have been steadily maintained or rising. 20 years ago, which was actually 1995, shockingly, your vaccination rate for DTaP was at 78%. Polio was at 88%, MMR 90%, and Hep B 68%. And then if you fast forward 10 years to 2005, DTaP actually climbed to 86%, polio to 92, MMR to 92, and Hep B up to 93%. And varicella started to be taken into account as well since its advent in 1998. It was the vaccination rates for varicella was at 88% in 2005. Currently, being 2013, because that's the latest data we have, DTaP fell to 83%, polio was up to 93%, MMR stayed consistent, Hep B went down a little to 91%, and varicella went up to 91%. So as you can see, there hasn't been that much change in the rates of vaccination over the past 20 years, and if anything, most of them have steadily increased. I do want to note, however, that we have been seeing a resurgence of pertussis over the past few years, and as you can see, the rates of vaccination for DTaP have decreased slightly. Part of the resurgence, though, is also the adults not getting revaccinated, not getting that 10-year booster of the Tdap. Nationwide as well, the ratio of non-medical exemptions to state vaccination mandates still remains relatively low. Between 1991 and 2004, the mean state level rate increased from 0.98% to 1.48% of people opting out for non-medical reasons. Now, the media has sensationalized vaccination rates. This sensationalism, I think, has put both patients and providers on edge, making the conversation about pediatric vaccinations more difficult for us to have. I know I have been placed in situations where sometimes it's just easier to just brush off the "no, we don't believe in vaccines" comment than to address it, especially with the time constraints we now face as well. But I wanted to point out this data so that you're aware not every conversation about pediatric vaccinations is a confrontational one. So there's no reason to become flustered, defensive, angry, nothing like that in terms of this discussion. The majority of parents are just looking to you to ease their fears about watching their little ones get shots and to put the, "well, I read online that vaccines cause" thoughts to rest. I also hesitate calling it a debate or a controversy because I truly do not believe once you're given the scientific facts that vaccinating patients is debatable or controversial whatsoever. All right. So I'm not going to really get into the immunization schedule or anything like that. I just wanted to provide the CDC guidelines for you. I think these are the most user-friendly ones I've seen. These are obviously from birth through age 6. Our goal today is really to provide you with the tools needed to have the discussion that can sometimes be awkward, especially when you're first starting out as a new graduate or in your first few years of practice. So, and if anyone has any tips on how to remember the vaccinations and the ages, please add them in the comments or, give us an email, post them online, something. For us, we found that it was pure memorization while we were in school trying to remember at what age we give what vaccines. All right. And these are the recommended immunizations for children from age 7 through 18 years old. This chart gets a little bit nicer, easier to look at. All right, so discussion number 1. I mean, who even gets polio anymore is what we're going to talk about. This is often brought up by the majority of parents who voice their concerns about vaccinating their children. We have been very fortunate in the US as a result of vaccines, among other things as well, improvements in our water, environment, etc., over the years that we've gone through this life and never seen a case of the disease vaccines typically prevent. I mean, where we're based in Ohio, we had both mumps and measles outbreaks last year, and so many cases were misdiagnosed or they were difficult to diagnose based on the sheer fact that providers have not seen these illnesses ever. However, people all over the world are still contracting them. We live in a global community nowadays. There's no more isolation. People are coming and going to and from all parts of the world, which is fantastic, but it also provides the opportunity for these illnesses to spread. So the number one tip for starting this discussion, regardless of what the question the parent asks, that I will bring up on every slide is always look the parent in the eyes. It may seem like common sense, but when you're faced with someone who is putting your knowledge to the test right on the spot, it can catch you off guard. So looking the parent in the eyes conveys confidence and transparency. No, us NPs are not in the business of pharma conspiracy. Therefore, we are looking you in the eye as we speak scientific facts because there's no reason to be evasive. This is the easiest, most time-effective way to approach this conversation. Now, the second step, I know that there are time constraints during an office visit, but this is a very great link that has helped people really put into perspective just how many cases of these vaccine preventable diseases we still have worldwide. It's an interactive real-time map, and I'm actually going to switch the screen here, so just bear with me a moment. Just so you can see the map. I'm going to pull it up here. Let's see. I apologize. I'm just trying to pull up this screen and it's just taking a little bit longer than I had anticipated. All right, let's see here. Now, on this interactive map, it's real time and it pinpoints where cases of vaccine preventable diseases are located, and it gives you the number of the cases that have been reported, which is pretty phenomenal. You can actually zoom into your location. And I apologize, I don't know why it's not coming up on the screen for you guys. I'm actually going to place the link in the comments, and hopefully you guys will be able to click on it and view it on your page then. All right. Okay, perfect. So you guys have been able to click it. I'm getting some messages saying that you're clicking it, so that's fantastic. Thank you. So anyways, if you look at the United States, there's a lot of whooping cough, a lot of measles, a lot of mumps. I mean, they are all over the US. And then if you take a look down south, there's Guatemala. It has a nice situation of rotavirus happening. There's some diphtheria going on in Haiti. Both countries not that far from the US. And unfortunately in the news, I don't know if you guys have heard lately, the US just had our first case of death from measles in about 12 years, I believe. And I believe a 6-year-old boy in Spain just died of diphtheria a few weeks ago, and he was unvaccinated as well. So these things are still occurring worldwide. Just because they're not in your little community or you aren't aware of them does not mean that it's not happening anymore. And that's why I really like that interactive map. I mean, you can play with it, zoom in and out, see what diseases are by you, or things of that nature that might actually help in the conversation with parents. Hopefully you'll have better luck pulling it up than I did on the screen. The next step that you want to kind of go over is herd immunity. So this can be a complicated definition for some people, but I'm just going to break it down really fast. Basically, the way to explain it to parents is that when the majority of a community is immunized against a contagious disease, most members of the community are protected because there's little opportunity for an outbreak. So those who are not eligible for certain vaccines, such as infants, pregnant women, immunocompromised patients, they can still benefit from some protection because the spread of the disease is contained. The key here is to make this personal. For example, if you're seeing a 5-year-old who's not fully vaccinated, gently explain to the parents that it's not just their child who is at risk of contracting the vaccine preventable illness. They can also risk spreading that illness to perhaps, their neighbor, the nice pregnant lady who has a weakened immune system, or her the fetus that she's pregnant with. I mean, the unborn child can contract some of the viruses that the vaccines prevent against and cause significant harm. My background is in pediatric hematology oncology, and whenever I hear anything about under-vaccinated or non-vaccinated children, I just immediately think of those cancer kiddos. Their parents, their siblings, and they themselves are out in the public relying on us to keep these illnesses at bay so their loved ones can avoid, suffering any more complications or even death. And, we all know, we all agree, no vaccine is 100% effective. So we know that it's not going to always protect 100%, but this is how the majority of us can contain these diseases so that those who just don't have the opportunity for these vaccines are not affected. Just a personal side note, the reason we wanted to prepare this subject for a webinar is because we've been in situations where we haven't handled these conversations to our fullest potential. I mean, I was 3 years into my practice and I found myself faced with a patient handing me a personal belief vaccine exemption form, and I was 8 months pregnant. And she wanted it filled out so she wouldn't have to get vaccinated for her internship at a daycare. I got so upset when I saw that form. It was the first time I'd ever been presented with it from a patient. I started shaking. And here I was, the living, breathing example we always bring up, the pregnant lady, the unborn child. And I couldn't even muster enough courage or effort and conversation skills needed to explain to this woman why I would not sign her form. I wish I had had a straightforward kind of cut to the chase guidance that would have prepared me for that moment. But I just got all flustered and told her I would not sign her form, and she absolutely needed those vaccinations to be working with children. And then step 4, you're also going to see this throughout our discussions, make it a confident statement. You say, as your child's NP, I want him or her to have these vaccines. We're often taught to be objective and allow patients to make their own medical decisions. So we fall short here, I think, by just providing the information about the vaccines and not solidifying how important they are by making these kinds of statements. Often parents are just looking to us for our opinion, and here's where we should go a little farther than just providing the facts, I think. There's a nice little PowerPoint here, slide from vaccines.gov, how to explain herd immunity to the parents. It's a nice little chart there. Now, the next discussion here, you've heard someone say it before, I'm not injecting chemicals into my kids. And quite frankly, I'm not even getting into the whole vaccines cause autism baloney. We have all heard over and over and over again, the specific study was found to be a fraud. The doctor who authored it has been stripped of his license, etc. I'm not beating that dead horse. But here's how you face this conversation. Step 1 is maintain eye contact. I told you it would show up on every single discussion point, and there it is. And step 2, I think, is providing some perspective. Yes, most children who had these illnesses prior to vaccinations, they did fare decently upon recovery. I mean, we'll go over complications later. But yeah, for the most part, sure. However, most kids who got to ride around in their parents' vehicles in the pre-car seat, pre-seatbelt era, they fared well also. I mean, would you be fine driving home from the hospital with your newborn infant in your arms as you rode in the front seat? I'd say probably not. And it's in fact against the law to do so. Although when I really think about it, I think if I had to choose between car seats and vaccines, I would forego the car seat and make sure my child has vaccinations. But car seats are not the big money maker chemicals that are injected into children by big pharma. The car seat companies only provide us with 8,000 different options that seem to all have been installed completely differently, just out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Little rant there about car seats. And then I think the next point here is to just explain very easily how vaccines work. So they help you develop immunity without getting sick first. They're made from the same germs or the same parts of those germs that cause the disease, but the germs in the vaccines are either killed or they're weakened, so they don't make your child sick. Their immune system is going to react to the vaccine the same way as if it was being invaded by the disease. I call it like a little training exercise. They make antibodies in response to being exposed to that weakened or killed germ. Those antibodies destroy the vaccine germs just like they would destroy the disease. So they're practicing, and then they stay in your body, giving you immunity. And then if your child is ever exposed to the real disease, the antibodies are there to protect them because they've done it before. They remembered the training exercise. They've practiced this before. The next point that I think is really important here is to make sure that the parents know we're on their side. You need to emphasize that as healthcare providers, we are for the most part wanting your children to heal and fight naturally too. That's why we don't give antibiotics out for colds. It's why we do start low and go slow with medications. However, we have to balance this with modern medicine and scientific advantages. If their child needed an antibiotic for a bacterial illness, I'm pretty sure, wouldn't they want us to provide that prescription so their child could fight off the infection? You know, vaccines perform the same function, but they perform it preventatively rather than reactively. And I mean, really, in all honesty, these children are getting exposed and ingesting all kinds of crazy synthetic chemicals through food, air pollution, etc. But somehow vaccines have just taken the blame. Anyways, by stating that you agree with the natural process of the human body, you're showing them that you're on their side. And with that train of thought, but it just doesn't make sense in regards to vaccinations. We need to attack these things prophylactically instead of treating them reactively. And then the preservatives. Yes, vaccines have too many preservatives and chemicals in them. We've heard that. But we do need them in our vaccines to keep them stable so that they're effective when they're administered. And for those who are interested, there are some preservative-free vaccines, and they're usually the pre-filled syringes. Those are usually preservative-free. You want to point out also to the parents that as a result of studies done after thimerosal was precautionarily removed from the vaccines, the incidence of autism actually increased in Denmark, Canada, and California, the locations of that study. They now view autism more as a mix of genetic and environmental factors rather than a reaction to a medical treatment. And something I also found interesting was you can mention that children are exposed to higher amounts of aluminum in breast milk and formula than the amount that's actually in the vaccines. The CDC has a really good fact sheet that breaks down the most common additives in vaccines, and it explains why they're used. It's on their cdc.gov vaccine website, which is pretty interesting. And then here's your confidence statement. As your child's nurse practitioner, I want him or her to have these vaccines. All right, I'm going to just take a moment here, see if anybody has any questions. All right. Any comments, feel free to share them. Kind of digest that information. I know that's a lot of talking. All right, very good. Now we're going to go on to discussion number 3, side effects. Yes, everything has side effects, including vaccines. So here's how you face this conversation. Maintaining the eye contact is there as well. Discuss the most common side effects. The majority of the side effects are mild. They're sleepiness, low-grade fever, redness, soreness, mild swelling at the injection site. However, in extremely rare instances, sometimes unfortunately more serious things happen. And according to the CDC, severe reactions to vaccines occur so rarely that the risk is difficult to calculate. For example, the risk of encephalopathy from the measles vaccine, it's 1 in 1 million. It's 1,000 times less than the risk of encephalopathy from getting measles. And it's similar to the risk of acquiring subacute sclerosing panencephalitis after the natural measles infection. It's really important to stress, I think, that there is a higher chance of side effects occurring in a child who has taken Tylenol, cold medicines, even their precious antibiotics, you know, amoxicillin, the Z-Pak, all of those things. It's more common to have side effects or adverse effects to those medications than it is to a vaccine. Just as with any medical treatment, there's always a risk, but it's just as important to note that vaccines are the safest medical treatments on the planet. They're the most researched, and they undergo the most thorough process prior to entering the market. Something that resonates with a lot of parents is letting them know that it usually takes an average of 10 years for a vaccine to get approved by the FDA for use. 10 years of research before the FDA okays the vaccine. And then, of course, you're going to go back and make it personal. I think a good tactic is to share that you had your own children, your nieces, nephews, you know, neighbors' kids, whoever, somebody in your life vaccinated. When patients see us as not only providers, but also as healthcare consumers who would choose to vaccinate our own loved ones. I think it builds rapport and confidence in your desire to see their children vaccinated. And then you're going to do your gentle but firm, confident statement as your child's NP. I want him or her to have these vaccines. And honestly, personally, other than pain at the injection site, the most common reaction that I've had in the office with patients whenever I give vaccinations is vasovagal syncope. I think a lot of that has to do with nerves and the anxiety of getting a shot rather than the effect of the vaccine itself. People work themselves up a lot. The anxiety is always worse than getting the actual vaccine. And this is one of my favorite arguments that, or points, I should say, that resistant parents make. I had chickenpox. I survived just fine. You know, these illnesses aren't even that bad argument. Yeah, I had chickenpox as well. I was part of the chickenpox party generation, but I was born prior to the vaccine. So that's why. Step 1, you're going to maintain your eye contact. And step 2, don't sugarcoat the possible outcomes. Gently but firmly explain that death is a very real outcome of all these diseases, including chickenpox. People do not realize that. We don't have to be fearmongers. I really don't like doing that either, because I think that sounds too dramatic and it happens so rarely that I think it does more harm to our points than good. But we have an obligation to discuss all possible outcomes of these diseases and all possible outcomes of not vaccinating your children. And also, I think it's important to point out that a child or person may not die of measles per se or chickenpox, but what really can happen is the complications of these diseases, such as pneumonia or encephalopathy, can cause death. I think that's something that the general public doesn't put together as well. I think they think we mean, yes, the chickenpox is going to kill you directly, when that's not always the case. It's indirectly. It can be a complication of what the virus itself can do. And as I mentioned before, it can cause harm or death of fetuses if a pregnant mom is exposed as well. So, you know, that's something else I think people just do not take into account. You know, you might harm other people's families, people who are pregnant. That's a lot to carry, I think, on somebody's shoulders. So I think that's a very good point to make. I love this quote. I don't know who said it, but they are brilliant. The risk of getting severely ill as a result of these diseases is always going to be higher than the risk of getting severely ill as a result of the vaccine. That is something to constantly drive home to these resistant parents. The complications from these viruses and these bacterial illnesses is always going to be worse than it's always going to be more statistically likely to happen, I should say, than a reaction to the vaccine. And then just remind people of some of the complications that they've forgotten about or aren't even aware of. You know, you can have brain damage, seizures, hearing loss with HIV, HIV. With mumps, males can become sterile, or people can have experienced deafness and brain damage. Pertussis, the whooping cough, not just death, you can also have broken blood vessels in the eyes, facial bruising from the coughing fits as well. Rubella, miscarriage, severe cardiac defects, blindness, deafness, mental retardation in newborns. All these things that I just listed off for rubella can affect newborns. And then this is something I found interesting in my research. Rotavirus, there are approximately 600,000 deaths per year in children who are younger than 5 years old in developing countries because of rotavirus, because of the dehydration it can cause. 600,000 deaths per year in kids younger than 5. That's not okay. Too significant of a number for something that can be prevented. And then you've got the confidence statement portion. As your child's NP, I want him and her to have these vaccines. And I'm just going to go ahead and take another pause here. Any questions or comments? Be glad to answer them and discuss. And again, if anyone can come up with a great mnemonic or method to remember the vaccination ages, please share. Oh, here's a question here from Kelly. That's a great question. Kelly asks about, as you've heard in the news, providers banning unvaccinated patients from their practice, how the general medical community feels about that. And technically, the AAP, they do not think it's ethical to ban these people from your practice. It's recommended to actually just follow up with parents who decline their children's vaccinations on a regular basis, see if they've changed their mind. Continue to keep them in the loop as far as how important it is to get their children vaccinated and catch them up, but they do not think it's ethical to ban those groups of patients from providers' practice. To each his own. People own their own practices. They can kind of do whatever they want. But the official stance from the American Academy of Pediatrics is not favored to do that. Thank you, Kelly. That's a great question. All right. And we're just going to wrap it up here. Across the board, you want to maintain eye contact regardless of what discussion points the parents bring up to you. Like I said, do not try to be evasive indirectly. I know nobody actually means to be, but sometimes when you're put on the spot during these appointments, it just can get you really flustered. Even if you think you're armed with all the scientific information, it can really just knock you down. So just make sure you maintain eye contact. I think a good point also is to make it personal. Again, share that you had your own children, nieces, nephews vaccinated. Empathize that nobody likes to see their kid in discomfort, but the effects of these diseases could be life-threatening, and that outweighs momentary discomfort from getting the vaccine. Always end the conversation with a gentle yet firm statement. As your child's nurse practitioner, I want him or her to have these vaccines. Unfortunately, vaccinations are truly not really a personal choice. Unvaccinated people pose a risk for the entire community. I mentioned my pediatric oncology kids. You can hurt other people's families by choosing to not get vaccinated. And if it's too large of a number of unvaccinated people, we lose our herd immunity, and those who are most vulnerable are affected by these diseases that are preventable. There's always people out there. Always remember, there are always people out there that will get angry at you for sharing your information. Those who will not believe what you have to say. Jenny McCarthy, she totally has a scientific degree and background. She can captivate her audience. She's got the facts. They will take her word, or anybody else really who has gotten into that realm of anti-vaccination over your facts. There's just some people who are not going to buy into it, and there's those who think vaccines are some kind of medical, pharmaceutical, governmental conspiracy. All you can do is just try your best, present the information at hand, use the tactics we discussed, the eye contact, making it personal, and sharing your opinion. Yes, I want them to have these vaccines. Not, I think, not, it's recommended. Just say you want them to be vaccinated. You want people in your community safe and healthy. Those are going to be your best tools. And at the end of the day, you just can't win them all, unfortunately. All you can do is just know that you've tried your best. And I thought this was amazing. Since the advent of vaccination in the 18th century, the concept of inoculation to prevent disease has seemed counterintuitive to some people. Why would I give myself the disease to prevent the disease? And Benjamin Franklin, who I quite frankly really respect and think that he was brilliant and ahead of his time, he was actually a prominent early anti-vaccination campaigner. But he regretted his skepticism about vaccination after his 4-year-old son died from smallpox. And he actually wrote this, where he said he regretted and long regretted and still regret that he had not given him the vaccination. He just said parents will just never forgive themselves if a child died as a result of a preventable illness. And he thought it was safer at that point to vaccinate. Unfortunately, he had to learn it that way. And then here's some resources here that you can print out for yourself or for your patients. The CDC has some great ones. Most of them are free. For those of you that prefer electronic resources, there's an app you can download for iOS and Android, and it outlines vaccination schedules for children and adults called CDC Vaccine Schedules, and it's available on the App Store or Google Play. And you can have pocket-sized schedules as well that you can click and print from the CDC website, or you can order them for free. You can get laminated copies. And then for parents, that resource down at the bottom, that handout's a great way to build a rapport and give the patients or the parents understanding of what to expect through the first few years of life. And it's got some great infographics as well, representing developmental stage. And on the CDC website, parents can also enter their kid's birthday, and they can get a list of what vaccines are recommended and when they are due based on their age. That's always nice for them to take control over their kids' health as well. And there's our references for you. And that wraps up our first webinar for our What's Up webinar series, Pediatric Vaccinations, Discussions with Resistant Parents. And I'm just going to see if anybody has any questions or comments, anything they want to add. We really hope that this helped and will help you in the future. You can replay it. We will be sending you guys the link, so that way I know it's a lot of information to absorb all at once. You can go back and brush up, and once you start your practice, really get a handle of how to have this kind of a sometimes awkward, difficult conversation with your parents confidently, and hopefully displaying great scientific evidence and knowledge, which will just put them at ease in vaccinating their children. All right. Well, we thank you guys for joining us today. Can't wait for next month. Next month is going to be the topic of child obesity and how to have the discussion with parents and children about a healthy lifestyle for their kids. Again, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, feel free to contact us at info@np2b.com. And we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.